Alright guys, it's time to discuss what everyone's been asking me lately, the greatest mystery in all of the Strixhaven storyline, and the main thing occupying players' minds right now. And no, it's not deciphering a new standard meta, or breaking of new commanders, or even debates over controversial art. Today, we ask the real question: where the hell is Garruk Wildspeaker? I don't know about you, but me and others in the Vorthos nerdy story lovers community, we're all really incredibly hyped for when we saw the set relating to and referencing the Kenrith twins, and that's because at least lately Will and Rowan Kenrith have been closely tied to one of the original badass planeswalkers in Magic the Gathering, the huntsman, Garruk Wildspeaker. That's why I and so many others were really disappointed when all of Strixhaven was spoiled, and from the cards and the story spotlights and the story that came afterwards, it appears the big green man is not making an appearance in this set. Many other players I talk to don't really know why this is upsetting, so in this video I'll be discussing the recent events of Garruk and how they relate to the story of Will and Rowan, discovering why he should have come to Strixhaven and what he could be doing right now. Let's start near the beginning. I won't go completely over Garruk's origin story because I made a video on that like, I don't know, 6 or so years ago or something crazy like that. And while my content quality may have changed since then, Garruks Origins have not. We will, however, start with his fated encounter with one Liliana Vess, as it's the catalyst for the modern interpretation of his character. This fight between Liliana and Garruk was subject to, well, quite the controversy for its time, as Magic just loves itself a good controversy. The artwork of Triumph of Ferocity spurred conversations about toxic masculinity and abuse to women, but it also showcases the moment Garruk Wildspeaker would soon fall into lore obscurity. You see, this moment is Garruk fighting for his very soul, his existence, what makes him a unique character in the MTG multiverse. After being afflicted with the Curse of the Chain Veil by Liliana Vess, Garruk feels a blood hunger overtake him. This corruption then slowly spreads over him, and he tracks down his foe on Innistrad to have its side effects reversed. Well, in this card, Triumph of Cruelty, we can see that plan didn't quite have the intended results, leaving Garruk a shell of a planeswalker, looking emo AF in a Magic core set completely corrupted, and now out on the hunt for the most dangerous game of all, Planeswalkers. Garruk essentially went from a lumbering woodsman who communed with nature and wildlife to a homicidal maniac thanks to the Chain Veil's magical curse. The only character looking to help this wayward soul being Jace Beleren, who understood the effects of his would-be lover's veil and wanted to help Garruk from this twisted fate. Sadly, his plan of jamming a Haedrong from Zendikar into Garruk's chest was only minorly effective. It's like taking a Benadryl for insomnia. It may work on some people, on others it just leaves them a groggy mess, quite like me. God, I'm tired. The Haedrong was able to halt the Chain Veil's corruption before it completely overtook Garruk, but his aggressive nature still remained. He was super hostile even to Jace, who wanted only to help him, explaining that this was who Garruk was now, and he quite enjoyed this new bloodthirsty version of himself. Though he wasn't actively seeking to murder people anymore, at least not at the moment, he would still kill any who approached him blindly, and that included Jace. Fast forward a bit to the epic, not so well written War of the Spark, and Garruk gets mentioned again by Nicol Bolas, and yeah, Garruk's lust for Planeswalker blood was so legendary that even the god dragon Nicol Bolas devised a plan to not pull Garruk onto Ravnica for the War of the Spark. Now, it's not because Bolas feared Garruk directly, although he probably should. It was because the dragon believed that Garruk would likely kill a lot of other planeswalkers trapped on Ravnica with him, making their sparks unusable for his harvest. So, Garruk set this epic conflict out. Garruk then finally returns to the story with Eldraine, which was one of my favorite stories in a long time for MTG, but that was a pretty low bar to meet. It's really fun, and anyone who hasn't really should give it a read. Anyway, the half-cursed Garruk was on the hunt for the Planeswalker again, but this time it was because he was goaded by a Fey Planeswalker named Oko. Garruk really wanted to kill this cocky yet very handsome Fey and pursued him, and A lot of players really wish he had succeeded before he ruined every format and plagued playgroups up until his ban. But alas, Garruk was again corrupted, but this time by Oko's mind control magic, and turned into a bodyguard for this fae as he attempted a royal assassination on the High King of Eldraine, who happened to be the father of Will and Rowan Kenrith. This was a dark time for Garruk. He was under the control of Oko and being referred to as a dog. That was his name for the majority of this adventure. Although tough for us to see as readers, me especially being a huge fan of Garruk, the character actually enjoyed his time as Oko's dog. The effect of the mind control gave Garruk some relief from the constant torment he suffered from the Chainveil's curse. He didn't have to grapple with his bloodlust or the memory of the heinous acts he had committed in the past. He looked to be at some level of peace during this time. Though it was a forced peace, Garruk still welcomed it all the same. The true purpose of Eldraine's story, though, in my eyes at least, was to give us the true Garruk Wildspeaker back, as during that adventure, Will, Rowan, and the dog had frequent run-ins with one another as they were trying to foil Oko's schemes, and Garruk looked to protect Oko. Garruk, under the control of Oko, actually had some level of control over his own actions. At least, he could point himself in the direction of different targets to kill if he so intended, so there was a little bit of freedom there. This was seen a few times when Garruk, as dog, actually helped the twins fight off various monsters of the wilds throughout the story. Yeah, at times he'd also attack Will and Rowan, especially when Oko discovered that they were on his trail in the story, but still, he displayed some level of clarity in these actions. One of these bouts found Garruk and Will fighting against the merfolk of Eldraine, which, if you haven't seen, are not necessarily beautiful mermaids. They wanted to drag the pair below and feed on them. So yeah, though Garruk, being big, mean, and scary, Will saw through all that into the sadness and subjugation that lied just behind this man's eyes. Swimming below in dangerous waters trying to rescue the man, but again, Garruk was big, mean, and scary, and that meant that Will couldn't swim both of them back up to the surface, and he too ended up starting to drown. And that's when one of the silliest acts of randomness hits the MTG storyline. Garruk and Will are saved by a magically appearing cup. Yeah, certainly not the first object I'd think of when trying to save someone who's drowning. Could have been an enchanted life preserver, or maybe perhaps a fantastical floaty, or I'd even accept a non-corporeal noodle. But no, we got a cup in this story. But not just any cup. On Eldraine, it's known as the Cauldron of Eternity, so not technically a cup, but magical nonetheless. It's an ancient artifact of the Eldraine elves, which can restore someone's life should the cauldron deem them worthy. How do they deem them worthy? Oh, that's never really explained, but who cares? Well, the Cauldron of Eternity appeared to the pair as they struggled against death, scooped them both up, and brought them to the surface. For Will, it simply saved his life, but for Garruk, it did much, much more. As Garruk slipped from consciousness underwater, he technically would die in this moment. The Cauldron of Eternity spoke out to Garruk's heart, simply whispering that he was indeed worthy, thus pulling his soul back to his body, but at the same time also expelling the curse of the Chainveil from it. The result, when the pair returned to shore, they were greeted by a freshly cured Garruk, the first time seeing his uncorrupted character in literally years. Garruk was so grateful for the twins, who he remembered while acting as Oko's dog, were the only ones who showed him true kindness and compassion, that he promised to look over them as they hunted for the Fey Planeswalker, looking to end all of his schemes. At the end of Eldraine's story, with Oko defeated but not killed, and the twins revealing that they too are Planeswalkers and unexpectedly planeswalking away, Garruk sets off on a new mission. He could have tracked Oko and brought down his axe of vengeance onto the Planeswalker's neck, but being cleared of the curse, had sated his bloodlust, so he then decided to take a different route. He set off into the multiverse, forgoing his own desires to return to his wilds and partake in hunts, to rather find the newly ignited Planeswalkers who had cared for him during his most tormented times, and he would watch over them in return. This was his promise. Because Magic's story doesn't always align with the set's release date, the next leg of this journey actually happens a few years previously with the supplemental set Battlebond, where we first are introduced to the twin planeswalkers Will and Rowan Kenrith. Back then, they simply were a tool to show off the fun of the two-headed giant format in this rather odd expansion, and no one could have ever really imagined that these two would continue to make an impact in the MTG storyline. But here we are. Chronologically, the events of Battlebond take place after Eldraine, while the twins are under the care of Garruk. Battlebond didn't have much of a story to it, but the young Will and Rowan were essentially just practicing and cementing their fighting style in an arena-style competition. Garruk maybe thought this was a good environment for the twins to pick up some skills in self-defense, but he doesn't ever make an appearance in Battlebond itself. Which kinda sucks, because honestly, all of this development for these characters could have been way more believable if they had teased Garruk and Battlebond with maybe some art cameos or something, like anything. Yeah, it would have prompted a lot of questions at the time, but the way it went down, it feels like they just made things up on the fly and connected characters who really didn't have any connections whatsoever, which, let's be honest, probably was the case. However, we do get at least some nods back to this time in the story in Strixhaven, as Will and Rowan early on mentioned that Garruk finally lets the twins off on their own when he realizes that they can handle themselves on Kylum, which is the plane Battlebond takes place on. But outside of an early mention that only served to say, look, we didn't completely abandon the story point of Garruk protecting Will and Rowan. Ooh, we just didn't, nor will we ever get to see or read about it, ever. Garruk was a non-factor in the Strixhaven lore, and as you would expect, this rubbed a lot of the Vorthos community, including myself, in the very wrong way, as there were so many reasons why Garruk could have and should have been involved in the Strixhaven story. First, disregarding that Garruk is a complete badass who needs to be in every story possible for the end of time, and this is a personal request of mine, Garruk's mission to protect and watch over Will and Rowan was never explored. I already described the route Wizards took to completely disregard this aspect of the story, but sticking with it and expanding on it would have been so easy with Garruk simply accompanying the twins to Strixhaven. We could have gotten more backstory of what the group did together before this, the lessons they learned, the struggles that they faced, rather than coming in with a blanket statement like, oh yeah, Garruk finally let us have some freedom, acting more like they were captives than under his protection or even his tutelage. Although the history may not have been well explored, it would have given more context to that apparently forgotten plot point while also giving Garruk the chance to show off his new dad energy, seeing his little ones go off to college for the first time, and maybe just getting a tear out of his eye in the distance on the horizon. He didn't need to have a card to have this explained throughout the story, and it really would have added a lot of context to everything that happened and really build on Garruk's story and character just a little bit, and maybe have teased a little bit of what future stories could have used for him. I don't know, it seems like it would have been an easy slam dunk include in this story, or at least early on in it. Next, Garruk's beef with Liliana Vess. With Liliana Vess in Strixhaven's story, which also seemed really shoehorned in and inconsistent with any previous story we had of the character at this stage of her development, the stage was set for an epic confrontation between her and the planeswalker who she had cursed so many years prior. Will and Rowan could have been the bridge between Garruk's past and Liliana's present. Garruk consumed by all that pain he endured, the lives he stole while under her corruption, and Liliana's present, her state of mind of feeling unworthy to even be alive. Garruk, when he last saw him, was just deemed worthy by a magical cup, and like the mighty Thor, he could have taught Liliana a thing or two about what it really means to be worthy of anything. Maybe this could have been a huge disaster with a big fight breaking out, or it could have been a learning moment for both of them. Either way you play it here, there was an obvious missed opportunity in Strixhaven to have these two characters finally have some resolution to that plot point. Garruk also could have a nice interaction with the Oryx as the main antagonist of Strixhaven's story. Though not as potent as a corrupting force as the Chain Veil, the Oryx do operate through corrupting others, corrupting their young minds with whispers of power and the allure of a brotherhood of like-minded people, the comfort of misfits and outcasts, changing a world that had wronged them. These are all ideals used by the Oryx to corrupt unsuspecting students and citizens to their not-so-righteous cause. Garruk could have made a nice stand here, reliving his past memories under the curse and seeing how the Oryx spread a very similar corruption amongst their followers. He could have played an opposing role to someone like Luca, another Planeswalker who bonds with animals but for a much more selfish reason. Luca and Garruk would have been awesome to explore together, honestly. One being red aligned and the other green, but having those very similar powers. It may have felt a little redundant, but if done right, it could have showed how different the characters were despite having those similarities. Again, Luca subjugates animals and uses them almost as tools and, or in most cases, actually more like weapons, while Garruk bonds and respects his animal companions. There's a cool idea that you could really play with between these two characters. So where do I see Garruk and his future implications for a Magic story? Well, clearly I'm a huge Garruk fanboy, so I'm of course rooting for him to make a comeback in a huge way. The clearest story he has is exploring his relationship with Liliana and a resolute conclusion to that most iconic of moments from the original Innistrad block. Him facing down the person responsible for so much torment over his character's development. That wasn't done in Strixhaven, but it's still something to look forward to. Another aspect that could be explored is maybe a retrospective of Garruk's time traveling the multiverse with the Kenrith twins. Maybe a lot of it wasn't explored or expanded upon because they have plans for a little look-back set that sets the stage for Garruk's return to the present story by looking at what he did with Will and Rowan. That would at least add a lot more context to that part of the story that a lot of us feel has sort of been discarded. There's also another more positive reunion awaiting Garruk's story. Him finally meeting back up with Jace Beleren. Jace really did care about Garruk and his plight and tried his hardest to improve the Planeswalker's situation. Jace really never gave up on him, but more was kind of sidetracked by other events that took precedent over Garruk's situation. Maybe we could follow a story that, now that multiverse ending threats are kind of dying down, where Jace is only hunt for Garruk just to track his progress, finding the hunter has been cured, and them exploring together what's next for the big green huntsman. Really, all of these would be great ways to explore Garruk's character, and I hope whenever we see him back, it does Garruk justice. Anyway guys, that's going to do it for today's video. Let me know your thoughts on Garruk's character and where you could see him next in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and of course, tick that notification bell. When you do, you'll get notified when I go live here on the channel, so you can catch a fun live stream that I do with fans, so be sure to drop in and just enjoy some nice MTG banter. Anyway guys, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, see ya!